We'll
So
talk
you work
soon.
tonight.
Yes, no, I'm back at work Tony.
I'm back to okay. All right now.
Good evening. Welcome to the Richmond Public School Board meeting, Monday, August 20th. Madam Clerk, would like to call the meeting to order.
If board members who are present, please respond. Ms. Dorr, Mr. Barlow, Ms. Gibson. Here. Mr. Young.
Here.
Mrs. Cosby. Ms. Cosby is here. Mrs. Burke. Here. Ms. Owen. Here. Dr. Sapini.
Here.
Mrs. Page.
Here.
We have a quorum, Madam Chair, and our interpreter.
Si alguien necesita intérprete esta noche, por favor, levanta la mano. If anyone needs a Spanish language interpreter, please raise your hand. And also, board, I just want to let you know that CNN Translator is participating in the RPS Shines, and my wife and I and my 2 children will be volunteering Friday. So I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Next item.
The next item is 1.02, the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence.
Ms. Owen, can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. You may be seated.
The next item is 1.03, adoption of the agenda, and I do have one item to add under item 6, your board actions, and it would be 6.04, and that is to receive for action a request for approval for the superintendent to hire. Those are the only amendments I have, Madam Chair.
Motion.
If there are no other changes, you need a motion.
So move.
It's been moved by Dr. Sapini and seconded by Ms. Burke to adopt the agenda as received. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing that we have none, the agenda has been adopted as presented.
The next item is 1.04 to approve the minutes of the August 6th, 2018 meeting. Those minutes were distributed to you for your review as well as posted to board docs. I did receive one correction from Ms. Gibson, and that correction was made on her vote on the CAP. I just ask that the minutes be approved at this time.
Need a motion?
Madam Chair, I move that we accept the minutes as read and corrected.
It's been moved by Ms. Burke and seconded by Ms. Owen to approve the minutes as corrected. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing that we have none, the minutes have been received as corrected.
The next item, Madam Chair, is item 2, public information. I did not have any speakers sign up in advance.
If we have members in the audience at this time and you're speaking as an individual, please come forward, state your name, sign in. You have 3 minutes. If you're speaking on behalf of an organization, I ask that one person representing the organization come forward at this time. You have 5 minutes to speak on behalf of that organization.
Good evening. My name is Tom Hartman. I'm speaking as an individual this evening. I'd like to speak to the new draft for the strategic plan as far as I know, this wasn't available to us until a few minutes ago, so I really didn't have a chance to prepare my remarks in advance. But what I want to suggest is the re-inclusion of what was Action 1.10, which is not in the 8 actions now listed for priority number 1. 1.10 was survey students and staff every year on school culture and use the data to provide a school culture report card for each school community. I think the thing I want to point out is that in looking through the 1.1 to 1.8 actions in this next draft, I see nothing that draws on the knowledge and information of the field staff. These seem, at first look at least, to all be things that will be designed and generated from downtown. I think it's very important to have ongoing information from the field, from the schools. And what better information than information of a survey? What is the culture in your school? Where are the gaps? What's good? What's missing? What can be improved? What needs to be redesigned? So I ask you to reconsider adding Action 1.10 back in. I know there won't be time to justify everything cut from the previous draft, but I would love it if you could squeeze in a bit of discussion as to why 1.10 so far has been dropped. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sam.
Good evening.
Before you get started, if we have other members in the audience, if you will please come forward at this time, line up to speak. We would appreciate that.
Please bear with me. I have moved and my hotspot won't pick up my printer, so I'm reading it off my phone. My name is Shelley Batista, as many of you know. I am now speaking to you as a former employee of Richmond Public Schools. I've moved out of the Richmond area and I've traveled here 2 hours tonight because this is what I'm about to tell you is of extreme importance. It's regarding graduation irregularities. On June 8, 2018, the last day for seniors, after the seniors had left the day, Ms. Dean, the other 12th grade English teacher, questioned why 2 of my AP literature students suddenly showed up on her class rolls. These 2 students had failed my class. Ms. Dean contacted the 2 guidance counselors involved in the change and they assured her it was all okay. Their grades were intact under the withdrawn tab and so was their attendance, but how would this look on their report cards? Well, on Monday, June 11th, these 2 students were no longer under Ms. Dean's rolls and were back on my schedule in a brand new Edgenuity class. I believe these students were enrolled in Edgenuity sometime in May. Guidance counselors aren't going to manipulate schedules on their own. Someone else was involved in these changes. At this point, all their grades and attendance were wiped from the system, except Ms. Dean and I printed up their attendance on June 8th. It includes all classes all year, and it shows that I marked them both absent on June 8th. I have redacted copies here for anyone to look at. In this envelope, I have the originals with the identifying information. Both students attended approximately 30 to 35 days during the entire school year. They both failed English, and one was enrolled in government, which is also required. They both walked across the stage on June 12th as high school graduates. Ms. Dean indicates that 26 students failed her English class, most due to lack of attendance, and she believes they were all allowed to graduate somehow. We teachers, including Ms. Tucker, a special education teacher who is again no longer with RPS, we determined there may be about 30 students who graduated on June 12th without passing English, attendance being the most prominent reason. Don't look to the grade books, though. Whether it's an Aspen problem or not, I was assured administration knew key information was missing from the records when we saved them. The only information that the system allowed us to save were the titles of the assignments and the points awarded. There is no way of knowing where each grading period begins or ends, or if a 95 in a column is for a homework or a test grade. There are no dates or weights in the records. The IEPs that were changed, there are specific federal guidelines that must be followed. Teachers reported to me that there were multiple last-minute IEP meetings to make modifications in order for students to graduate. Students were given applied diplomas, which do not allow a student to receive financial aid and may not be accepted by the military either. One of my students was involved in this.
30 seconds.
According to other senior teachers and caseworkers, there were a number of these last-minute IEP meetings, and they expressed strong concerns regarding the required federal protocols and if these protocols were followed in arranging these meetings. Our education system has issues, and when the system has good people making bad choices, something has to change. I've heard administrators say you just can't push back up, and I say bull hockey. It's the only way we will be able to do our jobs properly. I've been trying to help our students, both in and out of the classroom for 2 years, and I will be following this issue along. My juniors from last year, now seniors, they are still my students, and I will be here for them. People are messaging me through social media, informing me of various irregularities where they worked. Other teachers and staff want to come forward for fear of retaliation. They won't. The retaliation is real, it does happen, and teachers do leave when threatened.
Thank you. This concludes our public information period. Next item.
Madam Chair, let the record reflect you've been joined by Mr. Barlow. The next item is board business. We do not have any items under that section. Item 4, administration business. 4.01, strategic plan discussion.
Thank you. Board members, as we shared on Friday and as is available on board docs and in hard copies, we have the latest version of the strategic plan, the 5 priorities, as well as now 8 actions in each of those 5 areas. We worked hard to incorporate the board's feedback on a number of different fronts, both from the discussion last time as well as from individual input, in addition to various community conversations that have occurred since then. And we would like to engage in a brief discussion to see if there are any final thoughts from the board in each of the priority areas, as our goal would be to formally adopt the plan at our next meeting on September 4th. So this would be our last formal engagement on these actions. I also just recently shared with you, and there are copies for the public as well, 10 draft goals based on the discussion that we had earlier. I received just a little bit of feedback on goals from the last time, and so took that information as well as community input and put together 10 overarching draft goals for discussion as well. So we'd like to take a few minutes and hear from folks on that front. So let's dive in, starting with priority 1. You'll notice that per the discussion we had last time, we shifted teaching and learning to priority 1, given that that is our core work here as a school system. So you'll see that is the first priority area now. And I'd like to just open it up to the board if there's any final thoughts or feedback on the 8 actions listed there.
Madam Chair, before you all begin the discussion, let the record reflect that you've been joined by Ms. Doyle.
Ms. Gibson?
Thank you. So my feedback on the strategic plan, I put together an essay, so you all likely know how my thoughts in terms of moving forward on the plan. I think that ultimately, and again I shared this at our last meeting, that I feel very strongly that there needs to be something on this plan that ensures that what happened at Carver does not happen again. And particularly in light of what we just heard in public comment. Something is not right, and we need to create a culture where teachers are comfortable moving forward, regardless of whether they're in the system or not. I just don't know how we can go back to business as usual. Whether it's a goal, whether it's an action, transparency, openness, allowing candor, this should be mission number one. Thank you.
Ms. Burke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very pleased that 1.3 action remains, especially with the beyond textbook strategy. That's most important, especially as we enhance our technology program and being realistic that much of what's in textbooks, by the time we get the textbooks and they're printed, is outdated. So thank you so very much for including the English and math curricula to be much more rigorous and hands-on by going beyond just the textbooks place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to priority 2. Again, I would open up the floor to any final thoughts or feedback.
Ms. Collins?
I just wanted to, well, a couple of things really. One, I do commend the 1.2 do whatever it takes strategy for the literacy plan, because we know that there is a word divide that we have to address, and so I really appreciate this, making sure that all third graders are reading at or above grade level. And I just want to respond to my colleague, Ms. Gibson, about transparency and doing things different and et cetera, and I agree. However, I do want to just say that a lot of what you're talking about is not just going to be addressed at this level, but at the state level and at the federal level. And so as we go forward, perhaps what we have to do is make sure that as a board goal, that is something that we advocate for changes in testing, because the school division can't just up and say, hey, we're not gonna follow federal and state guidelines. We cannot do that, so we do have to advocate for changes at a higher level. Now yes, make sure that we're transparent at this level, absolutely, but I think that it's a different conversation and a different strategy than this strategic plan specifically.
I concur with what you just stated, my colleague, Ms. Cosby, because we all know, we have witnessed a lot of things, a lot of times when we get mandates from the state as well as the federal, the mandates do not come with funding. So we put all these demands on our teachers, but there's never any funding to support those mandates. But again, when we talk about the standards of learning, we recognize that we have to have accountability, but also the standards of learning should just be, it's just the bare minimum. We need to raise the bar, the expectations for our students, develop the platform that each and every child can succeed and achieve their dream. And yes, we all for transparency,
but we do have to make that as a board's goal, to make sure those mandates come with the funding and support. Any other thoughts on the priority? All right, priority 3. Mr. Young, just real briefly, I just wanted to acknowledge inclusion of 3.6. And really, Mr. Young, you speaking in my capacity? What was that? 3.6. I just wanted to acknowledge inclusion of that, and I'm really excited about what that can look like in our different schools. You can tell that I can tell it. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really encouraged to see that we intend to increase the number of staff providing mental health and social supports, and also ensure that every school has a nurse. I think over the past 2 budget cycles, there have been many among us who have been advocating to have nurses at every school, so I think it's extremely important for us to define this as a priority in the way that we have here. So I think this sends a clear message that this is a priority for us moving forward, and this isn't going to be something that we push to the wayside after unfortunate budget negotiations. So I'm encouraged to see that. There's no question that it would be a great benefit to our kids and to our teachers and to everyone else in the schools if we had more staff providing mental health care for our students. So I'm really encouraged to see that. Again, with action 3.3, as my colleague, Mr. Byers stated, with the mental health and support, social support agencies or whatever that we're mindful of, and we developed a cost line, that to be mindful of what agencies and companies are out there as we develop this plan, that it wouldn't be any cost to our system. So I hope that's not put about that we continue to have that conversation and get those the appropriate agencies in place to help our children. Thank you. Ms. Cosby? I'm not sure if it might be in a different section, I'm not sure, but going back to Ms. Gibson's earlier point, when you talk about a safe and loving school cultures, I'm glad to see, yes, the celebration of students and staff. I'm sorry, I'm just making sure that I haven't overlooked it, I'm just looking. But if there's anything in here also to address workplace bullying, or something that will encourage open communication and dialogue.
Okay. Priority 4. Oh.
Ms. Dorr?
Yeah, I'd agree with Ms. Cosby. I think that's a good idea. Something about workplace bullying and or something to communicate that we want to make sure, to Ms. Gibson's point, that we have some kind of way for open lines of communication. So for teachers to bring forward complaints, for there to be an easy way to identify cheating issues in the future. So some kind of, it feels like we need some kind of goal to surrounding some of these issues that we've had.
Mr. Barlow?
Thank you. I really agree. I think it's it's critical for us to ensure that we are doing what we can to ensure that our teachers have a voice in our school system as well as our students. So I'm not sure whether that's something that we incorporate in the strategic plan this evening, or whether we can get some more details about proposed future actions for encouraging our teachers and students to feel like they're being listened to. I think it's having been on the board for a couple of years now, I've had the opportunity to speak with tons of teachers, and unfortunately, a number of them have come to me with concerns about retaliation in certain circumstances, with workplace bullying issues and things of that nature, and it is, of course, very important that we take that seriously. So I know that what I've seen from the administration so far has demonstrated to me that these concerns are taken seriously, but anything you can do to show us a vision for that moving forward would be helpful.
Dr. Sapini and then Ms. Dorr.
Well, it's certainly very important, obviously, that we do push the education of educators and support staff when it comes to trauma-informed practices. But I think we also need to speak the same language, and I mean that as far as RPS as well as the city, so that we can inform the public, the parents, of all the services that are out there. Because so often I feel that not only do they don't know, but certain folks in whether RPS or even in the city, they don't know. So we did speak about having, a list of all the different services, so that way we can all have the same information to be able to put it out there, so that all the families who are in need will know exactly where to go, and we're saying the same thing.
Ms. Dorr.
I have a question on 3.7, positive asset-based classroom management techniques. Is this the same thing as positive behavioral intervention services, or is it different? Because I know there was some state money for some pilots, and we've done it at some schools. My only thought is, mindful of your guidance earlier, that we should do a couple of things well as opposed to try 25 things. So I guess my question is, one, what is that? And two, how do we make sure that the trauma-informed restorative justice, positive behavioral asset, et cetera, we maximize the efficacy of those programs?
Yeah, PBIS is a specific program, and I didn't want, I don't want the strategic plan to be linked to any specific program. So this is speaking about a more general basket of skills and behaviors. And there are a number of different ways we could go about that. And to your point of making sure it feels integrated to our teachers, I think there's opportunities for connections with some of those other trainings that we'll be doing. But I do want us to take some time to see what are some of the well-received supports when it comes to classroom management that are currently in existence, and see if it's possible to leverage some of those already. But there are also others that I'm aware of and we could bring to the district. Okay, priority 4.
Mr. Young.
4.2. I think that could really shift the needle in regards to culture and RPS. I'm excited about that.
We're also thinking about 4.9, something around mowing lawn in your sandals, but that got cut, so
I'll take that one.
okay.
Ms. Dorr.
I've heard some great things about the Welcome Center. There were some conversations that I was involved in last year about confusion between the city Welcome Center and RPS's Welcome Center. I just want to make sure that we do not force immigrant families to go to 5 different places to get the information that they need. So I felt like there was a little bit of apprehension to think strategically about this as a city service. So I'm excited to see it in here, and I would just really underline the point that it needs to connect with the city social services so that we're not sending folks all across the city to get the services that they need.
I just like to stress the point, this priority, the deep partnership with families and community, I think is critical, that we as a school division, that we are intentional in making sure that every child, every family, we create a school division of inclusion, as opposed to having a school system within a system, which is what we currently have. So all of the action items, I think they're very important, and we need to be intentional as we create those partnerships with our families and the community, ensuring that every family feels valued, regardless of what part of the city that they come from, regardless of their socio-economic background. We need to be intentional, be a welcoming school district.
With that, we'll move on to priority 5.
This really regards priority 1, but it can be addressed by priority 5. And it pertains to what Tom Hartman spoke to a few minutes ago. And like him, I really would love for us to solicit information of our students in regards to what the culture, and not just students, but the teachers and all of our staff in the building. And I think several of us have spoken to this. Kenya spoke to this, but she spoke to us this evening. And how we are soliciting candid, honest, genuine feedback, absent any concern for perceived or real of retribution if somebody says the wrong thing. And perhaps some of that can be done in a priority 5 by way of a simple anonymous online survey or some other tool to regularly engage our stakeholders, all of our stakeholders, to identify, to Tom's point earlier, the culture in our buildings and those things that we have shortcomings in.
I will note, when we do discuss the goals, we do have one around student, family, and staff satisfaction. And so the kinds of questions that go into that could certainly, I think, get to a lot of these questions, but certainly take the feedback from you and others very seriously.
Mr. Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really glad to see that action item 5.1 is here. It's amazing to hear about the types of technology systems that we have in place now. Sounds like it's like a trip down memory lane for folks who are coming to RPS work with these systems, to see operating systems that are reminiscent of what we saw in the 70s and 80s. So I'm really encouraged to hear that we're going to be making some upgrades there. I do see that that we allude to the fact that we want to allow for data-driven decision making. And I think it's important to analyze data and use it wisely when making decisions. But I do want to make sure that, and I see that this is within the context of the HR and the budget and things of that nature. But I do think that this is an opportunity for us to think about the data that our students are generating every day in the form of testing, test results, and how we use that data. And I want to make sure that we're being very sensitive with it, that we're putting in place appropriate data protection safeguards, and that we aren't over-relying on that testing data when making decisions about the education of our students. So I'd really like to see us come up with other ways to assess our students and the success of our schools that may be more effective and have less disparate impact.
Ms. Owen?
Thank you. In general, I'm really happy with this. I would like to, 5.5, I want to broaden that scope. That's the one about our bus system, because I think we need to do more than that. I heard, it's really interesting over the weekend, new complaints about the food service and new complaints about the buses, about them being overcrowded, 3 students to a seat, sometimes even when they're large students. I think the hub system is something else we really need to take a look at. So I think instead of just saying to increase the on-time performance of our bus system, I think we need to really take a deep dive into our whole transportation system, starting with our preschool kids, because I know there are preschool children that could be in our preschools that don't go because we don't provide transportation to the hubs, all the way up through high school. I mean, it's just a problem. Yes, probably we need certainly to add vehicles, we need to add drivers, but I mean, I really think we need to really take a dive into that whole, it's huge. There's so many schools, we're trying to do so much for so many, but we're failing some.
Ms. Dorr?
I agree with Ms. Owen. Although the hub system is not directly impacted my district, I've heard from a number of folks, especially on the south side, that this has created a critical issue, and I think it really inhibits our ability to have equitable access, especially as it relates to open enrollment in some of our specialty schools. We talked about this at the last meeting, but I think tied to exploration of the hub system is really thinking about our transportation system in general, and if we're going to, I think it's the first strategic priority, really make our middle and high schools themed to encourage some organic integration, then I think transportation is a critical component of that. I know I said that last time, but I just think I agree.
Dr. Sapina and then Mr. Barlow?
Certainly, I agree with the issues with the bus systems and the hubs, and really all that really screams rezoning sooner rather than later, because that's the only way to address a lot of these issues. With a couple of schools coming down the pike that will be new, we certainly need to look at that sooner.
Ms. Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did want to speak to action item 5.4 briefly, because I think this is a very important goal for us to ensure that we are placing our resources where they're needed most. At the same time, I know that sometimes the path to hell is paved with good intentions. So I want to make sure that we are, if we put in place this type of equity formula, that we are assessing it every year. We've certainly seen state level funding formulas that were put in place that were likely well-intentioned, that we're now in a position where we just don't see any updates because it has just gotten too entangled in sort of a political mess. So I would like to make sure that we're analyzing the results of that type of formula if we're going to put it in place, and also making adjustments as we see necessary.
Cosby?
Thank you. I too am very encouraged to see 5.2 and anxious to start the rezoning conversations. But I did have a question and wanted to get more information about 5.7, Director of Operations, a subset of schools, and how this would be different than, let's say, an assistant principal. So, yes.
Yeah, so an AP could
take on this role, but it's about being clearer about job responsibilities. So what I've found in my experience is that when you have an individual who is directly responsible for many of the operational aspects of running a school, whether it's facilities or technology or arrival and dismissal, everything except for what goes on in the classroom. It frees the principal to truly be an instructional leader and spend their time in classrooms supporting teachers, ensuring that the instructional vision is upheld. Now, that could certainly be an AP role, but I think part of this discussion would be deciding, do we want our APs to be more instructional or more operational, or do we have different kinds of APs, and an operational AP, an instructional AP, or is this a separate role altogether? My experience has been when you do have someone who, regardless of what you call it, and I'm agnostic about the title, responsible for those kinds of operational issues, it allows the school to really accelerate its growth on the academic side, and so that's all that we're trying to achieve here.
Oh, okay. And so when we talk about we say a subset of schools, so we're thinking approximately how many schools to pilot this? Have we gotten that far?
Well, I think we would pilot it at Overby Shepherd and at, sorry, just kidding. I didn't want to overcommit and say that we would do this at scale, so I don't know. I think in a handful of schools, and if it seems like it is really working here, and we have secured the necessary resources, then we could scale it from there. But I think we would have to have further discussions around, is this 5 schools? Is it a certain set of schools, high priority schools? I think that'd be something that we would continue to look at.
Yes, I'd be interested in all the criteria.
Sure.
Making those decisions and even before committing to it, having additional conversations and perhaps looking at our schools now and the structures that are currently in place and where we kind of see this working already with an AP serving in this capacity. If it is happening, I don't know.
Sure.
So, okay, thank you.
Ms. Burke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having been in that position over 19 years as a principal and several years beforehand as a specialist in the role of an assistant principal, this is a dream come true. This takes, principals spend a lot of time with picking paint colors and deciding what locks need to go where and having to stop in the middle of an interview because the water's overflowing in the bathrooms. And even though you have crew chiefs and whatever else, just think all the things that just pop up, not planned, not on your agenda for the day. I'm sure any principal and assistant principal as well, they need to be in the classrooms. They need to be observing. They need to be making sure each of our children have the opportunities to be successful and correctly done. So I do hope that, as you stated, that Overby Shepherd would be considered as a pilot. That most definitely 7th District as well, and I'm not playing, because there's some things that, and I'm not being threatening either, forgive me, but just taking walkthroughs now in preparation for going back to school, a lot of the ills that we are currently experiencing is because we want the principals to do 20 things correctly at the top and well. There's no way one person, not even the assistant. Don't forget the discipline piece. That's not included in the operations piece. So however it unfolds, whatever school, I just hope those persons are properly trained to know their role and to know that they are there at the support of the principal and for the best expectations of keeping buildings clean, bathrooms clean. We need to do better in that overall piece, period. Whether you have 2 people cleaning the school or 5, schools should be smelling fresh, clean, technology should be in place, but things happen. Then the principal can continue with student achievement while that person takes care of that. I think it's an awesome opportunity for whatever schools, and I hope that we're able to continue with that. Thank you so much.
Ms. Owen?
I'll just make a quick statement on that. Having looked at the, 124 pages of the safety manual, that would be nice
Read it
if
all.
that operations person could be doing all those things about keeping limbs 8 feet off the ground and all those minor details as well as the major ones. There's a lot of paperwork in that manual, so I concur.
Just want to highlight two action items. In particular, 5.5. As Ms. Owen said, that we need to take a deeper dive into our transportation system, in particular the hub system. It has really, it's a safety issue. It has created socioeconomic injustice to our students who want to take advantage of the specialty schools and who have been accepted to our specialty schools, but because of the lack of transportation and trying to get to that hub location, they are unable to attend that specialty school. So I fully support that we take a deeper dive into addressing the transportation sooner rather than later. If we are truly trying to create equity, we got to start with transportation. We have to start. I know we have a lot of items that we need to address, but if we truly want to create a school division of equity, we have to address transportation. And other action items I want to highlight is 5.8, collaborate with the city to ensure that we complete not only the first phase of our comprehensive facilities plan, which includes the completion of Georgetown High School. We need to collaborate and to ensure that the additional funding that's needed to address the comprehensive plan. Because if not, we'll be right back here in the next 2 years talking about we don't have enough funding. So again, highlight transportation and 5.8 to ensure that we receive those additional funds to complete the construction project for Georgetown High School. Ms. Gibson?
I would just like to make a comment just regarding the process and moving forward with adopting the strategic plan. My request is that we, the next step is to get a completed document that includes the additional funding for each of the line items, as well as including the measurement methodology and the goals that have been agreed upon, and that we take this document and go into the community once again, ideally with a meeting in each of the 7 districts, particularly now that folks are back from vacation and teachers are back for the school year. I think that the time in getting reaction and feedback on that completed document would be critical before we were to vote the final plan.
Well, before we get to process, I will just check to see if there's any final comments on substance. Okay. I would love to take a couple of minutes, and since you only got the goals, the draft goals this evening, if you could take a couple of minutes, it's I sent it by email, but it's also in hard copy and is available for the public as well. Michelle, has it been distributed? It was, okay, great. If you could take a couple of minutes with the board member sitting next to you and just take a few minutes to discuss and gather any thoughts or feedback, and then we'll sort of, like we did last time, hear from each group to get a little bit of feedback on the goals as well. Goals.
Ms. Young, you have a question? You clear? You straight? Okay.
Just feedback. we're gonna ask everybody to come back together, and looks like the firm of Burke and Owen is ready.
Ms. Burke?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I have three, thank you so very much, three questions regarding this. Number one, since these are our top 10 strategic plan goals, I would like to see something here listed regarding the safe and nurturing environment, loving environments that we have, keeping our school clean and up to date. Is that on here? I don't see that on here, because that is an issue of keeping our buildings as they are this week, working on beautification and clean environments and bathrooms well kept. I think because that's ongoing, I'm sure that we're going to have, that's my first question, that should be included. My second question is my thought. Number 4 and number 5, Ms. Owens and I were just talking about this. Increase in proficiency, advanced rates, decrease in gaps. That's excellent. Because I think it was in the paper this week in the Time Dispatch regarding something about the gaps with the Hispanic and the children of color. So there should be a decrease, so I like that. Would you be so kind as to, I like number 9, decrease in suspensions, but I guess because it's a goal, we don't, right now we don't need to tell how we're gonna do that. Would you share what, I know what it looks like, but would you share what 100% accreditation is exactly?
Yeah, so it's a little bit complicated by the fact that the state has recently issued new standards for accreditation. They include not just proficiency rates, but also growth rates, as well as reductions in chronic absenteeism and other factors, many of which are captured here. And so many of the ones below number 1 feed into number 1, although they stand on their own certainly as well. If you'd like to go into more detail, I'm glad to call Dr. Epp up to kind of walk through the differences between accreditation last year and this year. Is that what you're asking, or?
No, I just want to make sure that, I think oftentimes when we speak of SOLs, it's more than SOLs.
Yes.
Where a school is fully accredited.
That's right.
There's a number. It's the attendance, it's the safety piece, yes. How many infractions we have, it's the what? Graduation rates,
That's
there's
right.
so many things that it's more, but I think overall, when you say a full accreditation, not just you, but anyone, it's automatically assumed that we're only talking about SOLs. I was in a meeting at a school this afternoon, it was SOL, but it goes beyond, it's student achievement with the growth, but it also, there are other components.
That's right.
Just want to make sure that that's understood. Maybe there needs to be placed an emphasis, emphasis on the side. Because oftentimes, I think even sharing with our community, if they don't ask, they don't know what fully is full accreditation. They're just thinking, pass that test.
Yes.
But it's also not that every child has to make 100% either. So, just for clarification purposes, that's why I ask. But I do ask that you do include a goal regarding our keeping up our facilities.
And I would say in number 6, I think part of how we would measure that, so let's say student satisfaction. We could establish, say, a set of 10 questions that we ask our students every year. And one of those questions could be, do you feel your school is clean? And you sort of put the answers of those together and create sort of an index, and we see, we'd like to see improvement of that over time. But I take your point, and we can look at that a little bit more.
So then number 6 goes back to what Mr. Hartman was saying regarding the survey per se, because that's what you're saying.
That's exactly right. And so, for example, on the staff satisfaction, one of the questions could be, something like, do you feel that your school culture is such that you're able to raise constructive criticisms with your administration? So I think there's an opportunity to build in a number of different things into these surveys, into these satisfaction levels. With family, same sort of thing. Do you feel your school is a welcoming place for you? Do you feel you know who to go to in your school for X or Y or Z, things of that nature. And so I think we can really build out a lot of different pieces of that in these satisfaction surveys.
There was one more thing from the Burke and Owen team, and that is going back to transportation. I'm sorry, but it's got to be maybe in the top 12, I don't know, but it's just, I really think it's a very critical point. I think it has to be a big goal.
Thank you.
Ms. Dorn, then Dr. Sapini, and Ms. Gibson.
I would like to see one, maybe two goals around something that communicates that the goal of educating our student isn't just a job and or going to college, something that communicates our desire to put forward thoughtful, committed citizens in this world. I realize that's hard to measure, but I believe that education is not just about finding a job, but it's about developing good humans. And so I think that in order to set our culture at the top, I'd like to see something related to that. And kind of related to that point, and I don't know if it's kind of embedded in it, is, because we're going to be focusing on trauma-informed care, restorative justice, positive behavior, something related to our students' ability to have better social and emotional learning. Something related to social and emotional learning standards, or something related to kind of the intangible aspect of making sure that our kids are coming out better than when they came in from an emotional standpoint.
Mr. Barlow.
Thank you. So I'm curious. I think that there are a lot of good goals here, and I agree with a lot of what I've heard from my colleagues so far. I am curious with regard to what we are going to be considering the baseline. We're talking about increasing a lot of metrics. Some of these sections have likely have data that may be more reliable than others. So I want to make sure that we have a very clear baseline of where we're coming from moving forward, and the reliability of that data is very important. And also, I'm not sure to what degree we really successfully measure the number of students entering the workforce in high wage and high growth jobs and things of that nature. So I'm curious to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I would say on some of these we have very good data, and on some we have no data. And so I think next year, year one, would have to be a baseline gathering year for some of these. And we'd have to come up with a way of defining what qualifies as a high wage, high growth job. But I think that would be a good exercise, and then we should try to make sure that if we do have kids going to the workforce, that those are the jobs that they're going into. So yeah, I think, again, in part, some of these, it would be a baseline gathering year, and in some of these, we would have a starting point.
Gibson, Dr. Sapini, and Ms. Cosby.
So I think the most important goal for me that I'd like to see on here is one in regards to teacher retention. I think it's critical that we do better. It's a priority for the state. It should certainly be a priority for our district as well. And I think we can measure that, at least in part, by looking to reduce the percentage of classes that are currently taught by long-term subs.
Well, I feel strong that number 4 is probably the most important goal because it drives so much of the rest. I do want to speak to number 9. Number 9 is a challenge mainly because what happens at one school with one person may not happen the same way at another school, depending on who that person is. That being said, clearly it needs to be extremely consistent, and even with certain, I don't want to say punishment, but for those who violate, whether a student or a staff member for that matter, depending on what the situation was, I think it certainly should be, that should be addressed, because that happens all too often. And when we talk about prison the pipeline, so on and so forth, this drives it. This drives it. Because we have seen situations where at one school a child does something, they get a slap on the wrist. At another school, or even at the same school, and a different child does something similar, they're practically thrown out the system. And to my core, I cannot have that. So I'm in favor of maybe more than just reprimanding someone when they violate someone's respect, goals and dreams. That's a problem.
Ms. Cosby?
I did, but I think Ms. Gibson has said what I was going to say about teacher retention, and I think I was coming at it not just from teacher retention, but also making sure that we, I guess the quality of professionals that we hire to, making sure that there's support for growth, but I mean, some of that is just would be within the tactics to accomplish those goals. So, I was just what I would be interested in, and I think going to the suspensions piece and speaking to what Dr. Sapini's concerns are, and I'm just looking at the actions under safe and loving school cultures. And I'm not sure if I see it, once again, it might be in here, but if that is something that can be included in terms of standards or, enhancing standards so that there's not such a difference when we talk about discipline actions. We're making those very clear, I guess. Anyway, but that would be a tactic to accomplish the goal. Okay. Spurt. Ms. Ball.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Going back to what Dr. Sapini was stating regarding the suspension piece, I totally agree with him. And he's absolutely correct in terms of a situation can take place in one school and you may be, I hate to take away recess from a child, because all children need recess, but being realistic, sometimes that happens. In another school, it may not be written up at all. Another school, the principal may have the child come in on Saturdays. But I think we also have to be mindful of our SCORE, I think that's the name of the handbook for discipline, that we have ample training on that from the beginning, faculty and staff, and that we follow the guidelines listed. Because I think that's a part of it too. Sometimes we just have to be reminded that we do have a document and it should be reviewed often, and that we are held liable for following that. So if the students know from the beginning, if you fail to report to class and you're roaming the hallways, there are consequences for that. But it lists in that code of conduct it lists in that booklet what the consequences are. So we just need to be, and parents are aware as well. Well, it's different in one child's school than my other child's school, so just what is the policy? So I think it's most important also with the professional development piece, as we talk about loving environments, one of our top goals or whatever, what is a loving environment? My decision of a loving environment may be different than my coworker around the corner in another school. So if it's going to be, and more oftentimes our children transfer from school to school. So why is we like this school more than the other school, but we're following the same, but we interpret differently. So that goes back to the professional development piece. And Dr. Sapini, I agree with you totally on that point of it varies from place to place, school to school. And sometimes child to child, sometimes boys get caught up differently than girls for various reasons. And I'm really concerned about that when we look at the data, when we think of subgroups. So, and I have my own thinking on that. But being the mother of 2 sons, thank you.
Mr. Barlow?
Thank you. So I also want to talk just for a second about number 9 here, because of course we want to see a decrease in suspensions, but I think what we all really want to see is a decrease in the behavior that leads to suspensions. And one piece that just I want to watch out for and that I would be a little concerned about is perhaps unintended consequences. So if 4 years from now we're seeing our suspension rate drop, but we're seeing behaviors that are the same, then I worry about seeing situations where we are either not putting in place sufficient restorative, where we may not put in place sufficient restorative justice practices and just allow certain behavior to continue in the classroom. So I am all about goal number 9. I just want to make sure that we are coming by it the right way, which is to engage these students when we see that there are problems at home, when we see their problems in the classroom, when we see early indicators of students who have experienced trauma or are having problems paying attention or whatever in class, that we're actually providing additional supports for them. And what I fear is a situation where where that's not happening, and people may feel certain pressure to ensure that those numbers are right. I'm sure that we won't be encouraging that kind of culture, but I just want to make sure that we're aware of that and monitoring for it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for all that feedback. We should talk process for a minute. The original plan was to bring this back for adoption at the September 4th meeting, which would be our next meeting, where we would have the goals, the priorities, the actions, as well as the additional funding necessary articulated, with some framing language, of course, to talk about sort of the aspirations that are behind all of this. Ms. Gibson raised the question of additional community meetings. I think I'm more than happy to go back to the community, though I do want to note this is largely a reflection of what the community has said after over 170 community meetings. But if it is the will of the board, I'm glad to set up a time. I think we might be able to swing one evening this week when I'm free to go back out and have additional conversations with the community based on this. But I also want to be mindful of that the board has largely now weighed in, and so I just want to make sure that we are able to sort of bring this to resolution. So I'm glad to follow the will of the board on this.
Mr. Young?
Well, a couple of thoughts. One, we made a commitment to have this in place in time for the new school year, so I think it's important that we do that. But two, I do think that if there's an opportunity to, per Kenya's recommendation, between now and then, include a couple of additional opportunities for folks to weigh in on the product, then I think that would be productive, and I'm sure everybody around the table will be willing to assist, because we are mindful your team has been stretched thin and working very, very hard, so we don't want to put more on their plate. But so I share that say I'm willing to help if there's an opportunity to convene a meeting. I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but I do think it's important that we adopt it in time for the new school year per preceding commitment.
Ms. Owen?
I was just saying, again, we can certainly find a time and gather folks to help. I think really it's the question of what role does the board play ultimately in this process, and this is, I would say, everything before you is 95% from the community. That's how we got here. If we go back out for another round of feedback, the board will not have an opportunity to then, if you want to adopt something by the start of the school year, I think we would have to delay that, because then you would need an opportunity to respond to the next round of feedback. And so I do think at some point the board needs to weigh in and say, we feel good with what we have heard and we're ready to move forward. However, if it is the board's will to delay things into September, I'm more than happy to follow the board's direction on that, but I don't think we can both adopt on September 4th and do another round of community engagement. So I think we need to pick a path. Either we sort of move forward based on, again, over 170 meetings with the community, of which this largely reflects, or again, if it's the will of the board and you'd like to push this into mid-September, then we can do another round of feedback.
Ms. Owen?
Since I've been on this board, we've been talking about the strategic plan. We talked about it when we were running for office. Here we got it. I think we've heard from the community. I've heard plenty from the community, and I think that you and your team need to be working on getting the schools open on September the 4th? The 4th, right now, instead of working on this. I think now it's in our lap with your assistance. I don't think that we need to go back and have more meetings. I think we need to get it done, and so we can start working on it, implementing it.
Any other comments, feedback?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Mr. Barlow?
Thank you. I would like to get a better, so you mentioned that we may put together some verbiage to help frame this document. And I know that we've put in place a mission statement before, so I think it may be a time to sort of brush that off and see if we can incorporate a guiding philosophy to the plan. Although I do think that the 5 principles outlined in it do a good job of that, but having some concise statement to pull it all together. And in that statement, I really do hope that we can see some language that that discusses or that brings up, that makes the point that we do value transparency and openness in RPS, and that we do value the input of all of our stakeholders. And with that in mind, if there is, I mean, we have had an incredible number of sessions to gather feedback from the public. And I realize that the school year is coming on here quickly, but if we could do a session at some point, I would be okay with having a slight delay in finalizing the plan earlier on in the school year.
I do also want to note, just for the record, that in my weekly email communication, which goes out to several thousand people, I included this draft as well, and received a fair amount of feedback from individuals in person and a few in email as well.
Process question. So in addition to the 170 community meetings, we've had opportunities for the community to provide feedback via the website, RPS website.
Yes, ma'am.
And what are the means of participation the community has had?
Yes, in person, on the website, email, and so on. Look, why don't we do this? We will hold, we'll figure out a way to hold a meeting this week to welcome members of the public to share any final thoughts on this draft. I want to make sure that nobody feels like their voice is not included. My commitment to you is I'll make sure that that happens. I'm going to do some work with my team to figure out the date and the time so that we can make sure we get that out as quickly as possible tomorrow. And if there is any significant change, which we're sensing from the community, I will circle back to the board via email and see if we can keep this on track for September 4th. How's that sound to everybody?
And so also want to remind board members, if once we receive the additional date to hold another community meeting for input, I would encourage that we be in attendance as well to support this initiative. The extra step to encourage community engagement. Ms. Gibson?
So for the meeting, the community meeting, I think it's important that the document that they have the budget information on it. Will that be available at that time?
Not if it's going to happen in the next 2 days. So then I think we're talking next week. And then, which again, I'm glad to do. If that's what the board would like. It's just, it takes a little bit of time for us to like fully vet and come up with these numbers and draft all the verbiage, which the goal was to do this week so that we could get it to you all, so that you'd have a full week to review in advance of the 4th. But if it's the will of the board that is complete in its entirety before it goes back out to the public for review, then let's just all agree that we will not adopt this on the 4th and we'll move it to the 18th. It's just not going to be possible to do all of this in that time frame.
Cosby and Ms. Burke.
Well, thank you for the additional meeting, to just present it to the community. I will say this, the 2010-2015 strategic plan was a document that did not have the budget when it was presented and adopted. And I would just hate to see something thrown together kind of quickly. We have the goal and we have some tactics, but not all of them. And putting this strategic plan, it is a plan, but it hasn't been filled in with all of our tactics to complete. And I feel like that has to be done in order to figure out a budget. I mean, I could be wrong, but
well, I think
I just, some of that has to be done. And I mean, so I'm okay with presenting a plan because this is the plan. And then of course, we have to continue forward because we need to know as we go forward with our budget and make these decisions, how much it is going to cost. So I think that would be probably a separate exercise. That's my feeling. But I will say this, because we did have prior conversation the last time, at our last board meeting, to present the strategic plan, as well, to complete the cap, so people understand, okay, this is the corrective action plan, including the strategic plan in its entirety. So there is everything's being presented.
Ms. Bergman, Ms. Dorr, and Ms. Gibson.
I agree with my colleague. I want to make sure that I'm clear. Our strategic plan is a living document, correct? So if changes, we may end up revisiting, well, we should revisit this often. And I appreciate having received it with the RPS Direct earlier, and people that I know of that have talked with me. I don't know what the feedback has been on your sites, but they were real excited about it. And we've already, the new school year's already gotten started. So I do hope that we do reach an agreement soon, and I appreciate your getting this out to the public. But is it etched in stone someplace that a budget has to be in place by September the 4th in order for the community to see it? Because we know what we're working with. But if we want to change the amount of money set aside, we can do that based upon the feedback once we get that. Am I correct on gauging that conversation?
Well, I mean, like I will say, the very best that the administration will be able to do, frankly, even over the next 2 weeks, are estimates for these things, which will be based on reasoned good judgment about the nature of each of these initiatives. That will necessarily change and become more specific over time as we develop out, as Ms. Cosby says, each of these actions is going to need a multi-page work plan and specific operating plans and all this sort of thing, which we'll use to execute on this on behalf of the board, which will give us greater insight into the specific costs. All that we were aspiring to do in the strategic plan is to, as I said to you some months ago, articulate what, in essence, our ask of government and philanthropy is to help us achieve this. And so all you should expect, and if I haven't managed expectations, I apologize, is very round numbers for each of these things that are our best estimate of what things would cost. And but again, we've been trying to nail down the substance before doing all that work, and I'm sensing we are 99% good on the substance. There's a few tweaks based upon the conversation this evening. We need to go back and work on a few things on the goals, but I think we're very, very close, and so now I can work with the team to put some of those numeric estimates together, as well as craft some of that framing language, which will of course touch on some of these key ideas like transparency and other facts, other factors which have come up today. So, so again, yes. So what I'm putting out on the table, you all let me know one way or the other. Glad to do I can certainly do another meeting this week. We will take additional thoughts and feedback based on the documents that are already public, and incorporate all of that so that hopefully by the 4th we could have something final for you all to look at and hopefully adopt. Alternatively, and really I am glad to follow the board's will on this, if you would like a more in-depth process where we are really digging into those numbers and putting those in front of the community, I'm glad to do that, but we just won't be able to adopt on the 4th. We might have to push this out to the 18th, or actually we shouldn't go much further than that, because then we have the state is going to be, yeah. So we could go out to the 18th, take more time, or do a meeting this week, get feedback on what is currently public, as soon as the estimates are ready, I'm of course glad to share them out publicly. The more the more public will there is to generate the funding for all these things, the happier I will be. So I'm glad to get that out as soon as we possibly can. So I leave it to the chair and the board to.
Yeah. More questions from board members on Ms. Dorr and Ms. Gibson?
I think I would like to see I think if we're gonna set high standards for everyone else in RPS, then we should stick to our timelines and standards that we set for ourselves. I also think that grateful for an additional opportunity to bring the community together. I believe that we should not be making decisions about good things for our kids based on dollars. I think dollars may help us prioritize with limited resources, but the dollars to me might cloud our judgment on what is the best actual plan for our kids. And so if we believe that we should reduce suspensions, even if it costs $100 million, I think we should still put that number out there. So, anyways, all that to say, I would be good with one additional meeting, no numbers, and continued conversations, and an emphasis that this is a living document that we can and should go back to on a regular basis.
Ms. Gibson?
Yes. So my thoughts are that my hope is that the community is able to provide additional feedback on whatever it is that is required by us to present to the state. So if our document that we're required as part of the MOU needs to include budget numbers, then I think that it would be important to include that in this final feedback opportunity. But if it's not, then that's fine, and we're planning on presenting it to the state without good numbers. That would be fine too. Same with, I appreciate the thought regarding tactics. If the state document will have additional tactical information or is required to have that, then I think it would be helpful to have that inclusive as well. I think that ultimately my hope is that teachers are just now getting back to school. They're just getting back into their classrooms, and so this is a busy time. And I think there will be benefits to doing it in September, simply to give more opportunity for folks to be part of the process and be along for the ride with us. Thank you.
Just one note on what is left to put together for the state is the goals. So that's the only other piece. There's no additional tactics or budget information that is required on the state end. So just to clarify that point, Ms. Gibson.
To make sure that, to recap what we just heard from board members, that we know the strategic plan is a living document, meaning that there are opportunities to make adjustments, edits, revisions to the goals, action plans, budget numbers or estimates if we are able to receive anything, and also to understand that yes, this is a living document, but there will definitely be additional opportunities for the community to engage in this process as we continue this process. So this is an ongoing process. Many opportunities for the public to engage in providing their input. And as we all have, with our district meetings all over the city, at 170, when we looked at the themes, the common themes, they were consistent throughout the 9 districts. So with all of that, saying all of that, it sounds like we would like for another meeting, but also with the understanding that this is a living document, And if any budget numbers are provided, they will be estimates based on the time constraints. But we are also meeting the mandate requirement of the corrective action plan that's required by the state. And also I will restate again, if we are to have an additional meeting, I would encourage that this board support that effort.
Understood. Thank you, everyone.
Ms. Gibson?
One last comment. I wanted to also piggyback on what Ms. Cody had said regarding the corrective action plan. So if we could use this to also, share that with the community as well at the same time, that would be fantastic.
Okay. On to the next item.
The next item is 4.02, receive an update on school readiness.
Evening, board members. We are excited about the school year kicking off just right around the corner, and wanted to update you this evening on 3 buckets of school readiness. I'll talk briefly about staffing. Darren's going to talk about some of our facilities and operations updates, and Harry will preview some of the training updates we've had with staff. So as you know, we have a goal of being 100% staffed for the first day of school, and wanted to celebrate the 16 schools and programs that currently have no vacancies. So you can see those up here. Very exciting. As we think about where we are and where we need to go over the next 2 weeks, excited to say that as of when we posted this on Friday, as of today, we hired 7 more folks today. So we have 52 teacher vacancies. Of those, 21 at the elementary level, 22 at the secondary level, and 9 special education vacancies. We have 18 classified staff vacancies, most instructional assistants, but 1 custodian, 2 nurses, 3 school nutrition folks, 3 office associates, and 1 in-school suspension monitor. And then we have 2 academic coordinator positions at the elementary level. I do want to note that the over 50 plus school-based vacancies, and actually when we get to HR accident, you'll see it's actually a bit higher than that when you're also looking at central vacancies, does include some of the new positions that we talked about last week. So we've also been adding, for example, the ELL and bilingual positions, and of course there have been some resignations that we've taken. As a district, we're extending division level offers, and placing candidates in key vacancies to help reduce what is open. And then also in preparation for having a teacher in every classroom on the first day, we're working with the benefits team to determine folks who are out on FMLA or leave of absence at the beginning of the school year, so that we can have a long-term substitute already in place for those particular classrooms. I'll just quickly scroll through the vacancies at the elementary level. The elementary school that we're most focused on is Carver, for reasons that we have discussed over the last month. At the middle and high school level, we are focused on Elkhart Thompson at the middle school level, and George Wythe at the high school level. As we look at our specialty schools and preschools, we'll be giving special attention to staffing at MLK Preschool. Any questions on where we are right now with staffing before I turn it over to Darren to talk about operations?
Ms. Stewart.
I have a question, but I just want to say thank you. I know this has been a Herculean effort, and I will say that I've had a number of folks reach out to me asking how they can help, either be a long-term sub or, you know.
I've had 3 recommendations from you this week, so thank you.
Ooh. But anyways, I just want to say thank you to you and thank you to the community. I feel like, you know, I know we'll get better next year, and I know this was no easy task, so, you know, I'm sad to see that we're not fully there, but I think it was an ambitious target, and I know that you guys have put a ton of work into it, so.
And we still have 10 days to go. We're gonna get there. I'll turn over to Darren.
Okay, good evening, school board, Superintendent Cameras. The operations team has been very busy, so much so that we have people literally tripping over themselves in our building as we're all working. Starting off with the locks, we are on track to install more than 1,270 new locks on doors by the start of the school year, in addition to 100 new cameras in our buildings. Moving down to water, we are on track to have almost 300 new hydration stations and water fountains in our buildings, including 31 new ADA compliant bi-level water fountains. In our spare time, we have this little project called the Bathroom Blitz. We're on track to replace more than 200 paper towel dispensers, 150 toilet paper dispensers, 150 soap dispensers, 244 faucets, 144 sinks, 20 stall doors, 200 stall locks, and 100 ceiling tiles throughout the division. This is in addition to the dozens of repaired leaks and toilets and urinals that we've addressed throughout the summer. That said, there's still a lot of work to do in our bathrooms, and it will continue throughout the school year. Down to nutrition, we are on track to have installed 5 new ovens, 2 new walk-in freezers, 2 new steamers, and 2 new serving lines in our schools. And moving down to transportation, we are on track to install 300 car seats, or star seats as they're called, for our pre-K students, so that they will have car seats when they arrive at school, which is pretty cool. And then finally, down to school beautification events. I can't take any credit for this. This is all Sade Thomas and her volunteers and all of our community partners. They've done an amazing job in pulling together to make sure that our schools look fantastic for the first day of school. Any questions?
Ms. Burke.
Thank you so much. I have more of a comment. Today with the school cleanup blitz, it was a pleasure to walk into the bathrooms, thinking back to how it was a few months ago and to see it now. We had to take pictures together to document how beautiful and how clean, well painted. But what I noticed with the volunteers today, of which there were some students, high school students from Richmond Public Schools, other organizations volunteering, people were so happy to be engaged and had great pride. One young man who's a junior at Armstrong, he said, "Oh no, this is my school, I have to be here." The pride was there. So it was refreshing to smell the freshness. And I just wanted it to continue. Another school going in the 7th district that I visited, people were just happy to have the new water fountains. They pointed them out. There were no bags over places where water fountains were. But I think the best thing is the whole piece, even the persons that were plumbers coming in and parents coming in, and it was, and just most importantly, it was a combined effort. So hats off to Dr. Harris for spearheading this project. But I was very, very, very clean, very, very, very pleased to see how clean everything was in place greatly. I just wanted to continue in that manner. But there was a sense of pride there, and it was quite refreshing. So thank you so much for the work that's been done with the beautification. We must continue this as an ongoing project, but thank you. Well done. Well done. Well done. Thank you.
Ms. DeYoung and Ms. Owen.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was just said, and we spent probably about an hour talking about our strategic plan. We had the 170 meetings, and rightfully so, because it's a really important conversation. But we've made the point before that, at the risk of sounding really trite, that culture does eat strategy for breakfast. And all 9 of us, including our superintendent, along with our superintendent rather, and our senior staff and everybody, and all of our stakeholders, I know we're really intent on changing culture. And I just want to convey my gratitude to my colleagues and to our superintendent and to senior staff and all of our stakeholders, because folks inquire of me all the time about that very subject, the culture piece that Cheryl just spoke to, and I, for one, see a change, and I'm excited about it, and I know everybody else in this room is too.
I just have a quick question. Are all the locks done?
It will be done by the time school starts. We're still finishing up the last batch.
Then we still have a few more to go. That was a lot of locks we didn't have on those doors before. Thank you so much for all of this.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair, school board members, and Superintendent Cameras. I'm excited to report about the professional development sessions we've completed or scheduled during the month of August to prepare our school leaders, teachers, custodians, bus operators, and cafeteria managers for the upcoming school year. These sessions are designed to ensure a common vision for our work, that we are all on the same page moving forward. For example, on day 1 of Summer Leadership Academy, all principals and principal directors walked the Richmond Slave Trail to ground our leadership vision in the complex history of Richmond and build camaraderie among the principal corps. On days 2 and 3 of Summer Leadership Academy, we brought together principals, assistant principals, and key division leaders to launch our academic and school culture and climate work. Our active shooter training, which was facilitated by RPD, served to reinforce practices that will make our schools safer this year.
Mr. Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I heard rave reviews about the Summer Leadership Academy, so I'm really glad to hear that we're being very active in onboarding our school leaders and our principals, and getting everyone excited about the new school year and with shared goals. So I think that's a very important thing that we're doing that I'm not sure that we've always done an effective job in the past, which is bringing folks together before the school year, making sure that all of our senior leadership and our school buildings feel prepared and supported to start the school year. So thanks for your efforts there.
All right.
And then I just wanted to highlight that we have all of those successes, things we're doing, but there are 4 things that we're keeping an eye on as we look to September 4th. The first is with those 50 or so vacancies that are left, many are hard to staff. Some of the CTE topics, some of our arts, world languages, ESL teachers, and secondary STEM. And so 2 things that we're doing to address that. One is we're in communication with the VDOE around critical shortage flexibility, where if we have less than a certain number of qualified candidates, that we can look again to retired folks to bring in. And then secondly, there are a number of content areas where the praxis is taking place in early September. And so we're looking to ways that we can encourage otherwise qualified candidates who just need to pass the praxis the first or second week of school, of having them on deck to move in immediately after they get the scores from that test. So 2 strategies as we think about these hard to staff vacancies. The TDAP, this is an immunization that incoming 6th graders need to take, and we still have 500 incoming 6th graders who have not yet received this immunization. This is better than we were last year, but clearly with only 2 weeks left before school starts is something that we need to focus on. We had 1 clinic over this past weekend and another one scheduled for August 24th in collaboration with the City Health Department. On the first day of school, because students cannot enroll if they have not received the immunization, we'll have consent forms for parents. And then days 2 through 4, we'll begin collaboration with the city to do in-school vaccinations. So on September 5th, we'll be at Bouchal, Elkhart Thompson, and Brown doing immunizations. On September 6th, we'll be at MLK and Henderson. On September 7th, we'll be at Binford and Albert Hill. We also have our attendance team out in the community for any parents who have not come in to sign those consent forms, so that either we can get in-home consent forms signed or documented proof of the immunization. Course schedules. Tracy and her team have been working tirelessly with our high school principals to ensure that programs of study are ready and that all high school students are appropriately scheduled for the first day. So that's something that's continuing over these last days before school starts. And then, as Darren mentioned, while all schools will open with some beautiful bathrooms, we know that we want to continue the bathroom blitz until all bathrooms are ready and beautiful. So that's something we'll continue to keep our eye on. Any questions on those last 4?
Ms. Dorr?
The TDAP is a partnership with the health department, is that correct?
Yes.
Obviously not for this year, but I feel like there's an opportunity, since we already have health professional staff in the schools doing vaccinations, to also think about our physical requirement for participating in middle school sports, and how do we move that forward as well, given that we already have doctors and nurses in the schools. So just something to think about for next year.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Would just like to add, as you conclude this this portion of the agenda, just like to publicly thank the community, thank staff, senior level staff, Dr. Harris for spearheading this effort. Just can't thank the community enough, and thank our superintendent for the effort in creating a welcoming environment for our students on the first day, and not only the first day, but ongoing as the school year continues. But again, thank you.
Thank you.
Next item.
There are no items for number 5, your budgetary items. Item 6 is board actions. Receive for action a recommendation regarding use of capital funds.
Good evening again, everyone. I'd like to provide an overview of where we currently sit in regards to our capital funds in RPS. So for some time now, RPS and the city have shown different balances in RPS capital accounts. So to address this, the city and RPS finance and budget team started to meet regularly a few weeks ago in order to figure out what was going on. We've identified 4 core issues. One is that RPS and the city have had different names for the same accounts. And this can be particularly troublesome in cases where those accounts have very stringent rules around how the money can be used. Second, RPS and the city have had very different processing timelines for invoices. In order to address this, RPS is going to provide lists of our encumbrances to the city prior to their report, so that they have that information. A third issue is that RPS has been requesting reimbursements against capital accounts for expenditures that may not have been allowable. I think one of the really big benefits of us putting together that 6 or 7 page document that shows our critical needs is that it gave us a chance to bring that to the city and to go through those line by line and to get their buy-in and validation that those are acceptable uses of those dollars. And that's something that we hope to continue to do going forward. And then finally, RPS only recently became aware of certain funds. For example, the high school athletic facilities fund. That fund was made available in 2016. We just did not know about it until we started these discussions. So the next page lists our current capital balances. In our school capital maintenance account, we have about $6.6 million. It's important to note that this is a debt-funded account, and expenditures here should extend the life of a building. So these are things like your roofs, your boilers, your chillers, your really big dollar items. This 6.6 figure also includes about $1 million for lead abatement. This is how we're purchasing our water fountains. And it also includes the FY19 appropriation of 1.56. Moving down to our school capital cash account, we have $2,650,000 and $650,109, and these funds can be used for any maintenance needs. So our everyday repairs, buying light bulbs, sinks, broken windows. We have a lot of flexibility in how we use these funds. Moving down, we have our high school athletic facilities with 568, and these funds can only be used to upgrade athletic facilities. And as I stated earlier, RPS was not aware of these funds until recently. Then we have our ADA compliance bucket, and these funds are used to upgrade facilities to accommodate the needs of individuals with disabilities. And the last bucket here is our school bus lease. And there's $771,000 there. And these funds are left over from the payoff of the school bus lease earlier in the year. RPS was not aware that we had a balance this high, but we do plan to request to use this money to purchase additional buses. Because as we heard tonight, transportation is a key lever. So the total amount there is $11,646,250. I want to move down to the bottom of the page now to discuss the school planning and construction account, and this is to build new facilities. And there's currently $12,235,946 in this account. And some of these funds are being reserved to support the city's project management firm during the construction of Green, George Mason, and Elkhart Thompson, and for George Live. And this figure is in addition to the $150 million meals tax. So flipping the page now to the proposed use of the additional capital balances. First, we'd like to address our most urgent critical facility needs. So we're proposing to use $5.6 million from our school capital maintenance fund, and we plan to request an additional $5.3 from the school planning and construction fund in order to move forward on these projects. We will need to go to council in order to reallocate the $5.3 million in the school planning and construction fund. Our second priority is to install new water fountains and hydration stations across the division. As mentioned earlier, we have $1 million in funds in our school capital maintenance fund earmarked for this very purpose. We also do plan to request reallocation of any leftover funds in this account to be used for school capital maintenance. Moving down to the bathroom blitz, right now we are estimating to use up to $350,000 from the capital maintenance fund. And again, this includes sinks, toilets, ceilings, painting, making sure that our bathrooms are presentable and inviting for our students. Down to number 4, we like to purchase additional buses to replace those that are far older than industry standards. We have a $771,000 balance. We'd like to repurpose those funds to procure additional buses. Number 5, we'd like to address all ADA concerns across the division, and we're currently developing a spend plan to do so. And finally, we want to complete a variety of enhancements to our athletic facilities using the $568,000 in that account, and we have a spend plan attached here for your review. So turning the page, this is largely similar to what we looked at about a month ago with the addition of Summer Hill, which is now at the back of the presentation. So are there any questions or comments about what's presented here?
Ms. Burke?
This is great news, great news. But I want to make sure that I'm clear. So exactly the amount that we received from the city was exactly how much?
That is
That's
the
only
11,
okay.
yeah,
Okay. All right.
yes. And that is separate from the planning, the school planning money.
Okay. That's what I was hoping, but I just want to make sure I was really understanding it correctly.
Right.
Well, this allows us to do some things that we had on hold.
Desperately need to do.
We're off to a great start. Great start. Thank you so much. Do have a question about the athletic piece. How is that going to be decided? Another point in terms of what schools will get, or is that in this plan?
We have a couple of slides at the back that speak to that.
Wait a minute, do we ever have to that? Oh, we have to talk about it. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Simmons, can I ask, could you go ahead and speak to the buses, and then are you or is Mr. Hughes going to speak to the athletics?
Absolutely.
Okay, and then we can just open it up to discussion.
So the rationale for the bus purchases appears on slide 9. I think the takeaway here is that our bus fleet is very old. We need to start purchasing additional buses so that we can just have them longer and maintain them longer, and service that it is. So about 42% of our buses are 14 years of age or older, and this exceeds the industry standard recommended replacement of 13 years. So we would like to propose using the 771 currently in the bus lease line item to procure up to 9 additional buses. Yes, I think a mix of both. I do think that we have some buses that should come offline pretty quickly. So these 9 buses would fill that gap and also give us additional capacity. Okay. How many buses are taken offline? Out of the 9, how many are going to be replacement? How many are going to be just going to help us with additional capacity? Yeah, I think we look at the 20 plus year bucket to figure out which buses we need to take out immediately. I think there's 5 or 6 there. So those will be taken off, and we use 9 of the buses to cover those, but we also keep some of those buses online at a time. Dr. Sabine? Good question. So last year, how many buses broke down, or how many incidents were there? I'd have to get that data for you. It's a large number. I can pull that data. Okay. Mr. Garner? I'd like to, so first of all, I'm really glad that you have work with the city to uncover these funds. I think it's a shame that some of these investments weren't made a little earlier on, but I'm really glad that we're in a position to address some of these high-level needs. So thank you for that and for putting together this list of priorities, because I think it's pretty comprehensive and it addresses a lot of important issues. One of the issues that I'm not as clear on the import of, I know a couple of us have talked about this before, is the Arthur Ashe Center. I'm not sure if perhaps you can provide some more detail about how much use we're getting out of that building and what we expect the future of that building to be, given that this list is a fairly significant line item for air conditioning units. And if these have to be capital expenses, I don't want to put in 20 or
commissioners if the building's not going to be around for 20 years. Understood, and I do see that feedback from the board and from others as well. If it is will of the board, I'm happy to remove that from consideration. My pain point here is I was spending a lot of money trying to repair these buildings each year, typically for the next units. I think in the last 2 years, we spent $150,000 alone on the RPS. So there is a significant cost to just to constantly repair the roof. Sure. Do you have a rough estimate at this point about how often we're using it for RPS-related activities? I do not. Okay. So I do think it may be beneficial for us to do a cost-benefit analysis on the structure, because if we're not getting the use out of it that we could, and the other opportunities to partner up to hold athletic events and things of that nature, then I certainly think that there may be opportunity to put some of those resources into other critical areas for the schools. And in particular with athletic facilities, I mean, that is a facility that caters to RPS athletics, so if there's a way to take a look at,
places to put those funds, but only to the extent that they're most necessary. And I do have, I'm encouraged to see the proposed enhancements to athletic facilities section here, and I don't want to be too much of a homer when it comes to my district. But I will ask you to take a look at Carver Elementary's gym. It's a glorified storage space, and it's a real shame that it's in the condition that it is. There are certainly community members who are interested in doing something with it, but it seems to me that a school of that size should have some indoor recreation area for that student population.
Ms. Dorr and then Mr. Young.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Dorr. Like Mr. Barlow, like Scott said, and I have had an opportunity to converse with my colleagues and with staff about the $1.5 million for Arthur Ashe. So I would propose for our consideration that we remove those dollars for the very reasons that Scott identified, specifically if there's some probability that the Arthur Ashe facility will be incorporated in a larger redevelopment on the boulevard, irrespective of baseball or not. The point is that we as a city continue to converse about that property and what the future may bring. So I would agree that we should remove that 1.5. And I really like the recommendation that one of my colleagues shared, specifically to allocate those dollars perhaps to gym facilities, so that we identify our schools that have an opportunity to enhance or augment our gym facilities at our schools, and to use that 1.5 million in lieu of the Arthur Ashe Center, only because we don't know, or principally because we don't know if that facility will be around in a few years, and instead use it for our gym facilities at our schools. Thank you.
Ms. Dorr.
I am in support of re-looking at the Arthur Ashe expenditure, and I just feel like it's important to communicate to our teachers and students that we're prioritizing putting those dollars back into direct school. I think we could get into a tit for tat and an argument about whose district needs what, and we could cherry pick all of these different things on this list, and I think that's a dangerous slope to go down, and we'll be making decisions based on politics and not based on what's best for the district. That said, I would be remiss if I didn't say that it's not lost on me, and I've heard from a number of constituents that there's no first district projects on this list. There's probably other people that I've heard from their constituents about, the fact that their schools aren't on the list, and we have a lot of critical needs. So I think it could send a nice message to prioritize the 1.5 and relook at how we're spending that money and putting it directly into the classroom and into our schools. I don't feel strongly about specifically gyms. I think I would leave it up to you guys to take a second look at the list and or leave it to us to go back to our districts and send you some additional feedback, but I largely agree with the sentiment of my other colleagues.
Ms. Barlow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And really for the purposes of Arthur Ashe, I really am curious to know how much use we think we're getting out of it. So I'm not saying throw the building away now, but I'm just curious to know whether that type of investment is worth it for us from a long-term perspective. And I'm certainly open to any use of those 1.5 million if we do determine that we should use them for other things to put those dollars back at the schools. But I had to say something about the Carter Gym because it's beyond the pale.
Ms. Gibson, you have a question?
So my thoughts on the presentation overall is, as I mentioned in an email that I sent earlier, I'm hoping to get more clarity or just more detail in terms of the numbers that have come from the city. As an advocate, I spent a lot of time FOIAing information, and I just want to make sure that I've done the due diligence to make sure that I understand where the discrepancy came from. One of the items that we noted at the April 30th meeting was the line item that had about $9 million capital dollars that looked like it was leftover money from the last iteration of schools that were built. And so I need clarity what happened to that money, or if it exists, or so I think it would be helpful for me to see that whatever that documentation is from the city to understand more specifically where these dollars came from. As it pertains to the plan, I share the thoughts that we want to focus on those buildings that are being used day in and day out with teachers and students. That said, I know we don't have a lot of spaces to have athletic events that are of a substantial size, and so that the Arthur Ashe Center plays a critical role. So I welcome the opportunity for additional discussion on that. My preference would be for us to vote on this at our next meeting, so that since we just got the documentation, and I think it would be helpful to continue the discussion. And I will obviously put in a plug for the 3rd District School of Barack Obama Elementary. We've made a decision to change the name, and I think it would be remiss. That school building has substantial needs, and if we want to do our former president justice, I think looking at some investment in that building would be important to do.
Mrs. Simmons, I have a question. So the Arthur Ashe, the use of that facility is being used by all of our middle schools, high schools for sporting events, track meets, wrestling events, basketball tournaments.
Community events, yeah.
So the building is being used by the school division.
The school division and by the community.
And
by the community. There are community events out there too.
do we know how often the sporting events take place for our students?
Yes, I can pull that data and share that with the board.
Because I just would hate to not support something that we know that needs to be addressed, that our students utilize.
Yes, I'm in agreement as well, and I do appreciate my colleague, Mr. Barlow's suggestion to do a cost-benefit analysis, and we get additional information before making a decision about this tonight to pull it off the table without more information. What did I say?
You mean, you talking, speaking of Arthur Ashe?
Right.
Oh.
May I offer an alternative to the current proposal, which would be the current proposal minus Ash. And we could take a look at all the questions that were posed this evening, come back with information on that, and come up with a new recommendation on that front. So if we bifurcated that, what we'd be asking for is the board's approval to then have the chair go to, in essence, make the request of council for the various budget amendments that we would need to then execute on the pieces that require movement. But we could, of course, begin on those areas that do not.
Ms. Dorr, then Dr. Smith.
I'd like to make that motion that we authorize the chair to go to whatever you said, council, and talk about the maintenance dollars minus the Arthur Ashe, and we'll discuss the Arthur Ashe Center next school board meeting.
So it's been moved by Ms. Dorr and seconded by Ms. Burke to approve the recommendation excluding the Arthur Ashe building.
For clarification, I think the motion could simply be to approve the administration's recommendation regarding capital funds, with the exception of the Arthur Ashe line item. We'll take it from there.
Any discussion, Dr. Sapir?
In reference to Arthur Ashe and the AC units, can we get a number of AC units that they are there, as well as how much it would cost for each, and identify which ones have been a problem? Because my thought was to maybe address those that have been faulty and address those first.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd also point out that each of the units are over 30 years old, so we are having problems with all of them. Some are worse than others, but we can bring that data to the table.
Right, I understand, but it may be 30 years old, but it still works fine. That can help. Because if you have a 30-year-old car and it still runs great, it wouldn't be too wise to throw it out.
I think it's called a classic car then.
With a lot.
Call the question.
The motion was made by Ms. Dorr, seconded by Ms. Burke to approve the administration's recommendation regarding capital funds with the exception of the Arthur Ashe line item. Ms. Dorr?
Yes.
Mr. Barlow?
Yes.
Ms. Gibson?
Abstain.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Ms. Cosby?
Yes.
Mrs. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Owen?
Yes.
Dr. Sapini?
Yes.
Mrs. Page?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-1. The next item is 6.02, receive for action proposed revisions to policy 5-4.2, promotion and retention of pupils, 5-6.3, class rankings and honor rolls, and 8-2.4, attendance.
Madam Chair, if you want me to.
Yes, Ms.
Just to, for board members, this is your second formal reading, but I do believe the policies were presented to you 3 times. We did receive some feedback regarding some minor typographical issues that we will correct. It does not alter the substance of the policies, and we will get that corrected, and if you vote on it, if you vote to approve it tonight. So are there any other questions? If not, it's up for vote tonight.
Ms. Cosby?
Thank you. I do have a question about the attendance, the revised student attendance policy. 8-2.4. Okay, so when it was presented initially, it was presented as there will be 18 absences allowed, whether they were excused or unexcused, it didn't matter, just 18. But I noticed in this draft that we still have a paragraph in here about excused absences. So are we, so what is the stance? Is it still just 18, you get 18 per, what is it, per semester, per school year?
Yeah, that's correct. It's still 18 absences total,
Right.
excused and unexcused for the school year.
Right.
Or 9 per semester. We may have distinguished between excused and unexcused absences because we still have state code, state guidelines that we have to follow with regards to the tracking of unexcused absences.
Oh, okay.
And if I may add D, Ms. Cosby, you will still have the maximum allowable absences, and that also references for excused or unexcused. The 18.
Right. I mean, just like I read it and I got a little confused because I'm thinking, well, we're just saying 18, it doesn't matter if it's excused or unexcused.
Well, again,
I think I would still think, oh, well, I have an excused absence, so it shouldn't be counted.
No, what I was saying was that the language does state for excused or unexcused reasons, so it's clearly stated here.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that one line, but I have a whole paragraph that
Okay.
talks about excused absences.
Okay.
So, it's really defining it, so anyway, I just, it threw me reading it.
again, I do want to refer us to the waiver policy. So while we do not distinguish between excused and unexcused absences, we do give students and their families the opportunity to submit waivers based on extenuating medical circumstances or other unique circumstances.
This is procedural. We should have a motion and a vote on each policy separately or on all three at once.
It is possible, if it's the board's pleasure, to vote on them all in one block. You've done that before.
Right. Well, in that case, is this the appropriate moment to make that motion?
If that's what you want to do.
Of course it is. I would like to move that we approve all three of these policies changes.
For policy 5-6.3, for policy 5-4.2, and for policy 8-2.
8-2.4, yes. All three.
Need a second? It's been moved by Ms. Owen and seconded by Ms. Burke to approve policy revisions to 5-4.2, 5-6.3, and 8-2.4. Any discussion? Ms. Gibson?
I just had a couple of questions, just more regarding implementation with the attendance policy specifically, since my understanding is that this past year, if we had amended the policy, then 400 students would not have graduated, and I'm wondering what is the plan to ensure that we're able to adhere to this new policy as it states.
Absolutely. So it's very important that we take a collaborative approach to developing and finalizing internal guidelines that support our new attendance policy. To that end, we had a meeting today that was attended by over 126 school-based and division-level personnel, where we brainstormed how we would implement this policy, and together we're going to develop internal guidelines. So right now, the next step is for me to synthesize all this information that we collected today, to put it in a coherent plan to send it back out to all principals with the hope that they will distribute the policy to their assistant principals and school-based staff and receive everyone's feedback, and to do this very quickly so that we have internal guidelines in place before the start of the new school year.
And one of the things I noted, my colleague, Mr. Young on the news, and he spoke about the concern with students in class, but still would be considered in class. Could you speak a little bit about how this policy would pertain to students that perhaps have showed up, but for whatever reason have missed so many classes? It seems.
In terms of daily attendance, so at the high school level, one of the questions we grappled with today is what does it mean to be absent from a class in high school? In other words, we're trying to determine the minimum amount of minutes that a child should sit in the class to be marked as present.
Mr. Young?
Well, first, I just want to commend Harry and his team because y'all have done really terrific work on this, and I'm really excited about what Kenya just spoke to and addressing that, because that really is, that's the critical component of this. I've already spoken to that. What I do want to share with all my colleagues, because I don't think that I have conveyed this yet, is that, and candidly, I only learned this recently, Harry and I have discussed this, but that Aspen defaults to present. So it has been shared with me that, in other words, the default in Aspen is that the student was present. And so in other words, there have been circumstances where students were not present, but persons did not change that information in Aspen to accurately reflect if the student was there or not. So just wanted to take the opportunity to share that with everyone. And I know that Harry and his team are working on that too, but that's an important piece in this, as far as I'm concerned.
Ms. Gibson?
My other question is regarding the retention policy, and that is just a question about summer school. I'm curious to know what percentage of our students that are not passing the SOLs are currently enrolling in the summer school program, and I wonder how if there is a challenge, I presume there is, in terms of determining the enrollment, or what our capacity is of the program, and what the projected enrollment is going to be when it's based, I guess, in large part to SOL exams, which are very close to the end of the year, and I imagine staffing would be implicated by that. And
that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer to it right now, but I can get the information and bring it to the next board meeting.
Thank you.
Mr. Hughes, just want to point out in policy 5-4.2, really be very intentional when we talk about promotion and retention of elementary pupils. Because if we don't address or identify that student early on, it's a domino effect. And then that has an impact on absenteeism, behavioral issues. So we really need to be intentional in addressing that policy, identifying those students early, sooner rather than later, because that's the foundation, and it builds upon everything else.
Absolutely. One of the topics that we attempted to tackle today is what are schools expected to do once a child misses one day of school. We need to have actions ready to go so that children are not accumulating 5 days of absence, or 6 days of absences before we finally realize that there's an issue. But after the first time a child is absent, especially a child who was chronically absent last year, we need to be able to take actions as a school.
Call the question.
The motion was made by Ms. Owen and seconded by Ms. Cosby to approve all policy changes for policy 5-4.2, 5-6.3, and 8-2.4. Ms. Dorr?
Yes.
Mr. Barlow?
Yes.
Mrs. Gibson?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Ms. Cosby?
Yes.
Mrs. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Owen?
Yes.
Dr. Sapini?
Yes.
Mrs. Page?
Yes.
Motion passes 9-0.
Thank you.
The next item is 6.03, receive for action the human resources actions.
Good evening again. You have in front of you the HR action addendum. The actual HR action sheet is on board docs. There was a field that we didn't want to print, so you'll want to take a look at the version online for the actions and the printed addendum. So tonight we bring for your approval the nomination of 100 employees, the change of contract of 39 employees, the transfer of 1 employee, the resignation of 13 employees, the return of leave of 1 employee, the furlough of 7 employees, the retirement of 5 employees, the name change of 4 employees, the rescission of 7 employees, and the non-renewal of 1 employee, the reappointment of 14 employees, and the termination of 2 employees.
Motion.
I move that we approve the Human Resources Department actions and addendum as presented. An addendum.
It's been moved by Ms. Owen and seconded by Ms. Burke to approve HR action and addendum. Any discussion? Call the question?
The motion was made by Ms. Owen and seconded by Mrs. Burke to approve the HR actions with the addendum. Mr. Barlow?
Yes.
Ms. Gibson? Mr. Young?
Abstain.
Ms. Cosby?
Yes.
Ms. Burke? Ms. Owen?
Yes.
Ms. Dorr?
Yes, sorry.
Dr. Sapini?
Yes.
Mrs. Page?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-1. The next item on the agenda is 6.04, receive for action a request for approval for the superintendent to hire.
We're making the request that the superintendent have the ability to hire between tomorrow and our next board meeting so that we can meet our goal of 100% fully staffed schools on September 4th.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Barlow and seconded by Mr. Young to give the superintendent permission to hire between now and September 4th. Any discussion?
Are we talking about permission to hire teaching staff, or are we talking about all staff?
Certainly all school-based staff. I defer to the board on other parameters. School-based staff. Although I would like to include any school bus operators, some of the folks that are supporting schools. I think it was our intent, but may not be assigned to a particular school.
Ms. Lilly? Any discussion? Any more discussion? Call the question.
I just want to say yes, I mean, that's fine with the modifications we just talked about.
I will only hire folks to school-based positions or directly related like buses so that we can open up school on time. Yes.
Call the question.
The motion was made by Mr. Barlow and seconded by Mr. Young to give the superintendent authorization to hire school-based staff and directly related school support staff from August 21st through September 4th of 2000. Through September 4th, 2018. Ms. Gibson?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Ms. Cosby? Mrs. Burke? Ms. Owen? Ms. Dorr?
Yes.
Mr. Barlow?
Yes.
Dr. Sapini?
Yes.
Mrs. Page?
Yes.
Motion passes 9-0. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. We have no items for that this evening. Under 8 other informational items posted to board docs were items 8.01 and 8.02, and they were to receive notification of Head Start grants and receive notification of the crisis plan. The next item is item 9, new business.
Next item.
The next item is closed. Is there anything for closed? Okay, that concludes your agenda, Madam Chair.
Time for dinner.